Earthbound by Artemis Greenleaf. Chapter 19. Pub Lunch. I had to give up on my plan of having Connie lead Aldridge to the treasure map. Thanks, demon. May first arrived, moist and dreary. Rodney Aldridge and the haunted planet entourage stopped at the village pub for lunch. Aldridge, of course, was in costume. I suppose that was to let everyone know who he was, like advertising. For the circus. Una and I went down to see the spectacle. Doyle's tavern was heaving. I had no idea there were so many people living round here. One advantage to being a ghost: no queuing in line. We went in and found a prime viewing spot. Aldridge was sitting at a table with the woman I'd seen at his studio, a red plastic basket lined with paper and filled with sambos and chips sat in front of each of them. He had a pint of beer, and she had mineral water. Two men worked their way through the crowd to the part of the bar nearest Aldridge's table. I recognized them as Dermot and Galen, who had been so interested in Dad's haunted planet visit.
"Do you think they'll see her tonight down at the Ramsey place?" Galen asked loudly.
Aldridge pricked up his ears. I could tell he was trying to eavesdrop.
"Yeah, you mean Frau Hilda," replied Dermot. "Yes, the Hessian horror. They say she was the terror of the area when she lived at old Windsea Farm. Frau Hilda Draken. They were afraid to write about her when she was alive, but by now I guess she's been mostly forgot."
Una looked at me, brow furrowed.
"There was never any such person at our farm."
Aldridge was trying to type text on his phone without anyone noticing what he was up to.
"Right, but ain't that her photograph over there on the wall?"
Dermot pointed to an old tin-type photo hanging on the wall. There was a plaque underneath it, with a yellowed piece of paper on it. Odd. I'd never noticed that before. Una and I glided over to see it more closely. A stout, sour-looking woman dressed in black glared out of the photo. The paper, dated April 1st, 1888, read, "Murder. Frau Hilda Draken was found lying beside the road at 10:35 this morning by a passer-by. Garda Chief Oisin Maguire states that all signs point to foul play. Frau Draken was not well liked by her neighbours. She was known to have had a high turnover of tenants on her farm. But whether they just left, or something happened to them, is unclear. Frau Draken does not appear to have any next of kin."
"There was never any such person on our farm. No one even lived there at that time."
"Draken. Now that's an awfully peculiar last name," Una said.
"Yeah, I remember me old ma telling me when I was but a lad, if I didn't get myself to bed on time, Frau Hilda would have me," said Galen. "That's right. Her tenants was always disappearing. Some say she ate 'em," Dermot added. "That'd put the heart crossways in you, to run into her, wouldn't it?"
Aldridge stayed where he was, but his assistant went up to the beanjacks and read the plaque on the way. When she returned, they left the pub. Una and I raced back to the farm and arrived well before them. As it turned out, even though the show implied that the episode took place in one night, the taping would actually be 3 or 4 days, with the grand finale exorcism right before they packed up and left. Sheridan was staying with a friend from school for the duration. When they did roll up to the farmhouse, Aldridge got out of the car and looked around. He looked like he was smelling onions. Apparently, he wasn't sure if the place was good enough for him. He was used to visiting castles and estates. He barked orders to the cameraman about setting up. Then he rehearsed bits of the program. We couldn't help but be nosy Parkers, and we followed him around the house, listening. So did Dad.
"There's someone here on visitation. It is a woman. She hasn't been here in a while. Perry's telling me a name. It's German. Frau. Hannah. Hilda. There's a letter D. Keep it coming, Perry. I'm seeing D-R-E-Y. Draken. Frau Hilda Draken. Thank you, Perry."
He wasn't satisfied and tried it 3 more times. Aldridge strode around with his black cloak spreading out behind him. He touched the walls. He touched objects. When he got to the kitchen, he laid down in the middle of the floor and put his ears to the ground.
"I can hear them,"
he said, just loudly enough for the camera to pick up.
"I can hear the heartbeats of those who died here. She invited them in for tea, but the tea had something in it. They drank it. Then they were paralyzed. They were aware of everything. They just couldn't move. It was horrible."
His voice cracked and broke. Dad just stood there gawking, not saying a word. Connell glided up beside Una.
"What is that old fool on about?"
he asked, looking at Aldridge. "Had you had a chance to look at that name I gave you?" Una asked him. "Connell's very clever, with figures and puzzles," she said to me.
"Yeah, I have. Wouldn't you know? But if you shuffle the letters of Frau Hilda Draken, you get Frodney Aldrich."
His smile sealed in laughter, but just barely.
"Oh, you're a marvel, my love,"
Una giggled. "They set him up," I said. I hadn't given Dermot and Galen enough credit.
"So it would seem,"
said Connell. Una laughed. When she got hold of herself, she said, "So that's why the last name was so peculiar."
"A chestnut for sure, but whack to them all the same,"
Connell replied. Aldridge stood up, looking moist and pale.
"This room,"
he said, stretching his arms out to his sides.
"This room contains the traces of evil death has visited too many times. I can't believe anyone would watch this drivel,"
said Connell, wrinkling his nose in disgust.
"Oh, I don't know, love. People like a bit of drama now and again,"
Una said.
"Right. That's good enough for now,"
Aldridge told his crew.
"Let's get the rest of the gear rigged, shall we?"
He took off his cloak and folded it over the back of a chair. Then he opened a box and pulled a sheathed dagger from it, tossing it on the kitchen table.
"Emma, polish this up. It's tarnished. So, Mr. Aldridge, when do I show you around the place?"
Dad asked.
Mr. Ramsay. Luke, isn't it? Yes."
He put his hand on Dad's shoulder and started guiding him towards the door.
"Tonight we'll do our interior filming. Tomorrow we do exteriors, locations, any retakes, and the live interview. We'll finish up on Wednesday with the client walkthrough and the exorcism. I thought my assistant had spoken with you about that."
Dad stopped by the door, refusing to be herded.
"But how will you know where the activity is that way?" "Luke, my friend, you filled out a questionnaire, remember?"
Aldridge's smile was so infuriatingly greasy, I hoped against hope that Dad would throw the lot of them out.
"Questionnaire? Right, yes, that. Now you'll have to excuse me," Aldridge said, squeezing Dad's shoulder. "I've got a lot of work to do before we start shooting."
He breezed out the door. A deep line burrowed into Dad's forehead as he scowled at the floor.
"Right then."
Dad turned in the direction all of us were standing. He rubbed his eyes and shook his head twice.
Can't be. Must be part of their staging. That's it.
He jingled his car keys in his pocket.
I'll just pop down Dawes for a pint. Back before you know it,
he announced to the empty kitchen.
Do you think he saw us?
I asked Una.
No, child.
This is what he saw. She pointed to a picture frame hanging on the wall.
It's the thought that counts, you know,
Connell said. Now it made sense to me. The framed cross-stitch birth announcement my mother had made for me hung crookedly on the wall.
If you can't wait to see how Skylar gets rid of Rodney Aldrich, the Kindle version of Earthbound is live on Amazon.com. Don't have a Kindle? That's okay. The print version should be live May 27. For news and updates, please follow @agreenleaf on Twitter or fan Artemis Greenleaf on Facebook. Thank you so much for listening.
Earthbound by Artemis Greenleaf. This work is licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivative Works 3.0 United States license. Environmental sound effects used in this podcast were provided by www.freesound.org. Please check artemisgreenleaf.com for details of specific samples used. If you'd like to leave a comment or learn more about the other projects in progress, please go to www.artemisgreenleaf.com.
Dandelion girl, watch her play